Ever since Pac-Man Vs. was announced for the GameCube, and again once I played Nintendo Land for myself, I've always been intrigued by the concept of asymmetrical gameplay. Instead of simply two evenly matched teams battling against each other, both sides of the conflict now experience the game in vastly different ways. Dead by Daylight is such a title with a heavy horror aesthetic, and the free weekend on September 15th has been an absolute blast. This is one of the most fun and unique titles I've played in quite some time, and although there are some major gripes I have with it, they don't detract enough from the experience to make me hate it. The story is light but serviceable. There is an evil force known only as the Entity, which entraps its victims within a vague square-mile area, and demands one of its pawns to seek out, capture, and sacrifice any humans caught within. Thus begins the hunt between a single killer and 4 survivors. It's a simple workaround to the whole notion of why main characters simply don't run in one direction and keep going, as the entire area has become a sort of closed-off arena. Kind of reminds me of Cabin in the Woods. I like it. There is more lore scattered throughout the game that explains things like the leveling system or just to add flavor text to the item descriptions, as well as detailed backstories to all of the playable characters. All of this is unnecessary for this kind of game, but I definitely appreciate the effort that went towards making this a believable and interesting world. In order to escape, survivors must work together to repair 5 generators. Each map will have a different number of generators, somewhere between 7 and 9, and they're always randomly placed for each game. But only 5 need to be up and running. Afterwards, 2 separate exit doors will become available, and any survivors who manage to flee through one of them will have won the match, with a bonus being provided for multiple escapees. The killer, on the other hand, needs to hunt down and attack each individual survivor. After receiving enough damage, typically no more than 2 hits, a survivor can be picked up and brought to a sacrificial hook. While hooked, a survivor is very slowly sacrificed, upon which they are eventually removed from the match. The more sacrifices the better, although it is very difficult to sacrifice all 4 survivors. Generally speaking, survivors have the upper hand. They are slightly slower than the killer, and they leave a trail behind whenever they run, but they can drop pallets of wood or vault over obstacles to impede a killer's progress, as a killer passes through these obstructions very slowly. When a killer approaches, the survivor's heart will beat faster, acting as an audio warning. And aside from that, the killer is very large and can't really hide anywhere. The killer also cannot be totally stopped, and attempts to slow it down will only ever be temporary. If a killer manages to maintain a chase for an extended period, then the killer will receive a speed boost to further close the distance. Thus, it is imperative for survivors to block the killer's line of sight whenever possible. Furthermore, any loud noises that a survivor makes are indicated visually to the killer across the map, and these act as clues as to the whereabouts of survivors. Although, clever survivors can use loud noises as distractions. Finally, if a survivor is injured but manages to escape, which is fairly common, then fellow survivors can heal each other back to good health. The gist of it all is that Dead by Daylight is basically a game of hide and seek. Kind of reminds me of Pandora Tomorrow. However, the survivors have no way to fight back. This creates an extremely tense atmosphere, and anytime a survivor manages to lose a killer, feels like a monumental victory. There are even some little nods to horror movie cliches too, like how desperately a survivor runs while the killer just calmly and slowly climbs through a window, or how each swing of a weapon comes with a long, protracted wiping of the blade, as if the killer is relishing every moment. This game feels just like a classic slasher film. And just like most slasher films, there are quite a few problems which keep it from becoming truly great. For starters, it's far too easy to abuse the rules of the game. Once a survivor has been hooked, there's not a whole lot the other players can do to rescue him if the killer decides to watch as its victim slowly dies. This is a rightful example of camping, but what else can the killer do? It's extremely easy to rescue a survivor when the killer isn't standing guard, and if a survivor is continually rescued, then it can take as many as 3 hooks to remove a single survivor. So it's a good idea to make sure that every kill counts. It feels really lame to play as a survivor and get ousted in the first minute of a match without so much of a second chance, but the opposite is even worse. As a killer, I've had my victims rescued just a couple seconds after turning my back, and I've gone a whole match with hooking survivors 6 separate times but not managing to secure a single kill. Worse than that though, is the process of the chase itself. I can't tell you how many chases have just ended up being me and another survivor running around in a big circle. This just looks pathetic, like I'm being teased. Meanwhile, the other 3 survivors are powering on the generators, and I'm still playing Ring Around the Rosie with the same guy. It's extremely frustrating, and it makes me feel like an idiot, so I do my best to treat every capture like it's the only kill I'm going to get for that match. It is lame, no doubt about it, but at the very least, then I'll have accomplished something. The game tries to hinder survivors by giving them minigames for most actions, and failing this minigame creates a loud noise which alerts the killer to your location. There's no playable tutorial or practice mode, so new survivors are going to fail this minigame constantly until they understand it. But afterwards, it's easy to do almost every time, and a coordinated team of survivors will purposely use loud noises as false alarms. The odds are stacked pretty harshly against the killer, and although fast movements leave a trail, it's surprisingly easy for the killer to lose track of its victim. Killers have a short attack range and a long animation, so it's common to miss attacks, and survivors can take advantage of this by juking the killer as a Hail Mary maneuver. The only upper hand that the killer gets is that they are just a tiny bit faster, but it certainly doesn't feel this way. And if a team of survivors really know what they're doing, they can use items like the flashlight to almost shut down the killer's efforts. And yet, as frustrating of an experience as it can be, I find it extremely exhilarating. At its worst, the survivors are taunting the killer and leading it on an endless and goofy chase. And in some rare cases, there are connection issues as survivors mysteriously teleport around. But at its best, which is the majority of the game time, it legitimately feels like a serial killer video game that closely resembles the best of classic slasher movies. There are a couple of other issues I have with it, like how long it takes to level up, and the fact that most level up rewards are consumable items, which feels odd for a multiplayer game, and it reminds me of the burn cards from Titanfall 1. But the base mechanics carry the game well despite the awkward leveling shenanigans. On PC, the base game goes for a mere $20 with some paid DLC, both cosmetic and gameplay, plus the occasional free content update. On consoles, the price is up to $30. However, that does include most of the paid DLC, leaving out only the licensed content such as Michael Myers or Leatherface at a premium price. Even so, players are still matched up with other DLC owners, and it's possible to play on premium maps with them, so you never have to worry about being left out. I only played this game over the course of its free weekend, so I might still be in a honeymoon phase with it, and the repetition hasn't had a chance to build in. However, in that short time, I did experience the power of camping as well as how annoying a chase can be. On the other hand, these occurrences weren't enough to detract from the fun that I did have, and I can definitely see the variety in playstyle between survivors, and especially between the different killers, going a long way to adding longevity. I'm definitely buying myself a copy of this game, and I'm fortunate enough to have some like-minded friends to play with. Although, this is one of the few times that I would also recommend a multiplayer game for those who would play it alone. Playing as the killer is the obvious choice in this case. However, as a survivor, I'm shocked by how well I've managed to work with random players online. Similar to Resident Evil Outbreak, the developers have opted not to include in-game voice chat, which I think is stupid, but cooperation still works out really well. This is most likely due to how simplistic the objectives are, since everyone is on the same page and working towards the same goal, so it all works out quite well. That being said, the usual issues with most multiplayer games, like with a teammate quitting early for example, is especially damning whenever it does happen in this game, although that has thankfully been a rare occurrence for me. Before I close, it's tough not to address the elephant in the room. Yes, there is another recently released game with a strikingly similar theme. I can't really comment on it because I've never played Friday the 13th, but from what I understand about it, it features a much larger map, an emphasis on scavenging for items, and a greater reliance on teamwork to achieve multiple objectives, all of which make it a much more complicated and grandiose game. Dead by Daylight, on the other hand, is much smaller and much faster. From the moment a match starts, it's always action-packed as the killer could be around any corner, and the maps are small enough that survivors are never really safe. That's what I love about it. From start to finish, it's constantly tense and nerve-wracking, with no downtime. There is a good deal of luck involved, which is unfortunate, but matches begin and end quickly, and the moment-to-moment gameplay is always exciting. Again though, I haven't played Friday the 13th, so I can't give a fair assessment of it. All I can say is that I really enjoy Dead by Daylight. It's one of the best, quick-to-pick-up horror multiplayer titles that I have ever played.
Ah! Ah!
Thank you for watching my review on Dead by Daylight. If you enjoyed this video, click the like button, and if you'd like to see more, subscribe.
Yeah.